I came to Pittsburgh to do my PhD at Carnegie Mellon. My late wife and I came ahead looking for a place to live. So we wandered around Pittsburgh for a while, for a weekend, a long weekend, and ended up on Mirror Street in Squirrel Hill. And it was the last place we saw before we went back to New York. At least a week went by before we met any of our neighbors. There was a row of townhouses. And all of a sudden, on a Saturday afternoon, I think it was, and they knocked on the door and said, do you guys want to be in a movie? And I thought, well, if this is how we meet our neighbors, okay. So we went up to Evans City for the day, and we were sitting around. I didn't have a beard at the time, and I said, okay, I want you to be in that scene over there. It was by that time night, and here's a bone. And at that point, I had no idea what was going on, but I figured, I'm not going to alienate my neighbors. So I just sat there, and they said, chew on it. Okay. I didn't meet George then, but shortly thereafter, I got hired by QED, and I was doing a show, and George apparently watched this show and heard of me, and heard my voice. And then he discovered, apparently, that I was doing a PhD at Carnegie. That time in his life, he had a great sense of humor and loved in-jokes. And so he said, oh, I'm looking around for a scientist. And wouldn't it be great if my scientist actually had a PhD? Never mind, he's not an actor. So what happened was, I got cast in a film called There's Always Vanilla. That's when I met George, and I played myself. And I didn't pay any attention to it, and then I was called upon to review that movie for QED. And I didn't think much of it, to be perfectly truthful, so I reviewed it that way. However, the next thing I know from that, I get a call that George wanted me to come in and talk to me about this role in The Crazies, about which I knew absolutely nothing. He had me read a piece of paper, and he said, I want you to yell. That's all he wanted me to do, was yell. And I did. And he said, fine, you're my Dr. Watts. And okay, whatever that means. And we did the film, and I don't remember very much about it, and in truth, I never saw the film.
You can't stay active in the ultraviolet light.
He's in the water, man! Underground!
With Dawn of the Dead, by that time we were in Wisconsin, and I was teaching in Wisconsin. And Chris Romero called me and said, George wants you to do this film. And I said, okay, fine, happy to. I really enjoyed working with George. I enjoyed his personality very much. I mean, in those days when you worked on a film with George, I don't know what it became, but in those days, certainly, it was relaxed. You were around a guy with a great sense of humor, who loved to laugh, who didn't take himself terribly seriously, which I was more than happy to be around that kind of person. And he could make a non-actor like me feel comfortable, which was great. So I flew in from Wisconsin to here in Pittsburgh, and I remember getting to the shop on Fort Pitt Boulevard, and George was in a meeting. This is to show you how people started taking him on a reverential level. So they said, why don't you wait in this screening room and watch last night's rushes, which happened to be dealing with this mall. So I'm sitting there watching all of this craziness, these he didn't call them zombies, I forgot what he called them, but zombies is a new word, at least in his vocabulary. And watching these creatures wander around aimlessly and pound into each other and chew on each other and do all of these, and I thought it was hilarious, and I started laughing. And the kids who were working on the film were sitting on the floor, and they looked at me as though I were committing heresy. And then George came in. That was the beautiful part about it. George came in, and he started laughing. So all of a sudden, it was okay to laugh.
They won't run out of food, young lady. That's the problem, you see. And they won't run out of food while we're still alive.
These kind of things out.
That sequence in the old television studio with Howard and me, that was made up on the scene. That wasn't in the script. We did that. We walked in. I flew in from Wisconsin the night before. Howard was already here. When we first met Howard and I, it was immediately, the chemistry was phenomenal. I mean, we had glorious chemistry, even over dinner. I mean, you don't even have to be on the set. We were having, I just wish he was still around. As I was saying upstairs, after George, the person I miss most about this film was Howard, because I couldn't have come up with those lines if Howard hadn't been the great straight man he was.
Listen, quiet, quiet.
So at dinner, we had a wonderful time. We knew our lines. We went out to the studio the next morning at the crack of dawn, as I remember. And we get out there, and by this time, I'm well aware of the fact that the character in Dawn of the Dead is really an extension of the character in The Crazies. So I said to George, we got a problem. The scientist I play in Crazies is the same guy, except the problem is, George, he died in The Crazies, remember? And he said, that's right, yeah. Wardrobe, get him an eye patch. And that's how the eye patch got into the scene. Now, seriously, that's exactly how it did. So we get on this set, and he said to Howard and me, both of us are writers, he said, "Wow, what do you think of the scene? You read it?" "Oh, sure, we know it, Howard. George, we understand the scene. So what do you think of it?" So he said, "Okay, we'll do this then. Try it your way first." And Howard and I looked at each other and said, "Yes, yes." And that's what happened. That's how that scene was created. All those lines were absolutely out of left field.
What are you saying? I mean, you scientists.
Dummies!
You're suggesting...
Dummies! Dummies!
Excuse me. Listen, quiet, quiet.
And I honest to God, never realized that line would become iconic. It never occurred to me. Howard put me in a frame of mind where he was ridiculing me on camera, and George was ridiculing me off camera, and so I was fighting back against this, trying to get across the idea that there's some mortal jeopardy here, and you guys better wake up to that fact. And I credit Howard for creating the situation where I could even think of those lines.
And since we haven't touched upon our nuclear resources, why don't we drop bombs in all the big cities?
You're probably serious.
I'm deadly serious.
The second scene where my character's talking into a microphone, that's out of the script. That's right in the script.
We must not be lulled by the concept that these are our family members or our friends. They are not. They will not respond to such emotions.
This film was, at the time, the highest budget film he'd made, $450,000. I remember those figures because we talked about that. And I know how important the film was to him. Night of the Living Dead had come out of nowhere, really, to accumulate the attention it did. Having had that, I've known other people who've had that experience where their first time out of the gate, they have such a unique product on their hands that they spend a lifetime trying to equal that or surpass it. And for me, that was what Dawn of the Dead was about. He was trying to overcome that and make sure that the world knew he was not a one-trick pony. And he certainly did. In Dawn of the Dead, he certainly did. After I went back to Wisconsin, I heard he had health problems. I forgot something to do. He had some kind of his kidneys or some kind of problem where you had to have surgery. And I knew he didn't have much money at that time. So I remember tearing up my Dawn of the Dead contract and sending it to him, saying that this is one bill you don't have to worry about. And I got a lovely letter back from George, saying that someday he'd pay me back, which he did. He did. And that's the last direct contact I ever had with George. But what he did for me, and what's the really important thing, I want to make that point out there, is that I never wanted to be an actor at all. And I hated teaching. The politics of teaching were ferocious. So what happened was I came back to New York one summer. I got a grant from the National Endowment to do a summer thing here in New York, actually. And I met a lady, and she said, "You really ought to be doing voiceovers." And I thought, God, would I love to get out of academia. And so what George did for me, and it really, I don't know whether he did it deliberately or whether it was sort of an outgrowth of what happened between us. But when I did Dawn of the Dead, he may have been the Crazies as well. When I did Dawn of the Dead, George put money in escrow with the Screen Actors Guild for me. Apparently that's how he could hire me. So, so when I went back to New York to start a career in voiceovers, I had perfect entree to the unions. You know, so I immediately joined SAG, and because I was a member of SAG, I could also transfer as my ancillary union to the American Federation of Radio and Television and Radio Actors, which was the basic union for voiceover performers. And that's what, and he made that possible. That was the great gift George gave me, and I'll never forget it.
Unemotional.
Quiet.
Like any work of art, it's written or created for an audience, all right? Normally, the audience is short-lived. I can't speak for anyone else in this cast, but I am astonished and frankly overjoyed that the fan base for this film has remained steadfast and, if anything, has grown over the last 40 years. And having done this now for the first time, and I see the generations of you who've come out for this film, I'm blown away. And the distances you've come from England, from Japan, from Mexico, from all over the States, it's an astonishing statement to your loyalty to George and what he accomplished. And for my part, I couldn't be more humble about this. I'm I'm in awe of you. It's as simple as that.